Okay, I'm just gonna say this in the most basic way possible with no necessary forthcoming analysis, because I think the simplified version of it might actually, like, get into people's heads in the way that I need it to. Arguing about movies online is not politics. Go to a city council meeting. So if you're watching this, I'm going to assume that you know Anora won Best Picture at this year's Oscar ceremony. Not only that, but it took home a lot more too, with the film's director Sean Baker taking home wins for Best Editing, Best Original Screenplay, and Best Director. In a weird way, this was so predictable that it became unexpected. Anora had a lot of early award season hype, and then a bunch of drama happened with a bunch of other movies, and it's kind of incredible that we came full circle in this way. And because there was so much other Oscar-related drama this year, I think Anora flew under the radar in terms of public discourse, and now that it's received all of these accolades, we're getting all of the debates about it at one time, and it's a lot. Okay, so if you haven't already guessed, we are talking about all of the discourse that has popped off surrounding this year's Best Picture winner, Anora. And so to get into this, we're going to kind of break it down in a very specific way. We'll talk about the movie, I'll talk about my individual thoughts on it, we'll talk about the director, Sean Baker, and his controversies, and then how those controversies are sort of implicating the way that people are now viewing the film. Anora, written and directed by Sean Baker, follows the story of a 25-year-old stripper named Annie who lives in Brighton Beach, and her whirlwind of a marriage to the son of a Russian oligarch named Vanya. Eventually, Vanya's family gets wind of this, and they send over their henchmen to try and get the marriage annulled, and wacky hijinks ensue. I definitely think the tone of it is unique for an Oscar Best Picture winner, and it's also not at all what I expected going into the film when I watched it back in the fall. You've probably heard this before, but it's very funny. Parts of it are almost like a farcical comedy, and I will put the spoiler timecode up on the screen, but the serious impact of the film doesn't really hit you until the end and kind of the very last scene, where after the marriage is annulled and Annie kind of comes down from this delusional fantasy that she, involved herself in. She ends up initiating sex with one of the family's henchmen, Igor, who is the only one who typically shows any general kindness or goodwill toward her during most of the film. While she's trying to get intimate with him, he ends up kissing her, and this causes Annie to have a breakdown. This is the only time we see her get really vulnerable in the film, despite everything that happens to her. And, it's in response to a man showing her kindness and seeing past the guarded front that she puts up, looking at her as more of a person rather than just a body. Okay, so I thought Anora was just okay. I gave it like a 3.5 on Letterboxd. I thought it was really funny. Like, I enjoyed the parts of it that kind of like leaned into that slapstick-esque comedy. I think Mikey Madison is great. I think the whole cast is really great, honestly. And I like that it's not your typical, like, kind of super overly serious, dramatic Best Picture fodder. My issues with it sort of lie within the pacing. I think the back half of the film, after you get through sort of like the farce comedy stuff, I think it drags a bit toward the end, and the whole time I remember kind of sitting with this feeling of like, okay, like, where is this actually going? Like, I know there's a point here, but like, what is it? And I feel like you don't get that until the very last scene, and once the very last scene of the film happens, I got it right away. I was like, okay, I understand, like, what the point of all of this was, for lack of a better phrase. And I don't necessarily have a problem with the resolution of the film. I think that last scene is very beautifully performed. I just feel like it's almost not earned with how, like, the first kind of like 2/3 of the film is in tone, and I would have liked to see that seriousness explored a bit, especially when it comes to Annie's characterization, like, earlier on in the film. To me, it almost, I don't think this was intentional, it kind of reads as like a shock value thing, where it's like, oh, I get it, like, this man shows her some level of kindness and it kind of like makes her world crumble because of the front that she's, put on, that we see her put on in the whole film. I get it, but it almost seems like cheap to me in a weird way. I don't know if I'm making sense. I'm trying to articulate it the best I can, but I think I just, like, I ultimately came away with it, like, liking it, but I really wanted more. And that seems to be just me. I feel like I'm in the minority with that. Everyone in my circles who I know, like, absolutely love this film, and I'm so glad that they did, and I went in wanting to love it. I really thought this was going to be, like, my favorite of the year, and it wasn't. And, like, that's okay, and I don't think it's an indictment on me personally, nor is it an indictment on anyone whose favorite movie was Anora this year. And I wish more people would just, like, be able to think like that. However, I think something that is inhibiting people from thinking normally about, like, differing opinions on the film is kind of the shadow of Sean Baker and his politics and, like, how that has been dominating the news cycle in different ways, so let's talk about that quick. So, Sean Baker is an interesting guy. This is not his first film about sex workers. In fact, he's made quite a few of them, including Tangerine and The Florida Project, before writing Anora specifically for Mikey Madison. I have actually criticized Sean Baker in the past, most notably for a controversy that happened last year, where during an interview, Mikey Madison admitted that they did not use an intimacy coordinator on set, which is typically standard practice in a post-Me Too world. Mikey revealed that Baker gave her the choice as to whether or not to use one and power to her that she felt comfortable enough to choose for herself. However, the argument here is that actresses should not be put in situations where they have to make those decisions for the fear that they might be pressured into declining an intimacy coordinator or any sort of advocate when working with a director. To me, this is on Sean Baker entirely. Similarly, an Instagram comment also recently went very viral, which accused Baker of shorting his crew. However, several people who worked on the film have replied in the comments saying that this is not correct. Aside from Sean Baker's alleged behavior on set, people have also had a problem with his apparent politics both in regards to sex work and in general. Baker is a very public advocate for the decriminalization of sex work, a topic that I am not well educated on, so I'm not going to speak extensively on my thoughts about it and whether or not it is a valid or correct viewpoint to have, because I'm not well educated on it. See how fucking easy it is to just shut up when you don't know something? Anyway, it also appears that Sean Baker is following a number of controversial accounts on social media, including Libs of TikTok and IDF Babes, so perhaps he is a staunch conservative and a Zionist using his films to push forward his own weird agenda, or perhaps he is a horny 54-year-old who just follows whoever and likes whatever and doesn't care what people think about it. Either way, I say this whenever we cover quote-unquote cancellations on this channel, but however you feel about Sean Baker's politics and whether or not that influences the choice to consume the art he makes is entirely a subjective viewpoint. You might not care who Sean Baker follows on Instagram and you just like his films. Many people have pointed out that Roman Polanski, a notorious piece of shit, has unequivocally made some very good and very important art. The argument here being that morally sanctioning art like this, based entirely on the people who make it being squeaky clean and unproblematic, is counterintuitive to the consumption of art itself. Most people are also very morally inconsistent with this. They'll find ways to give passes to people they like who do morally questionable things while condemning others, or they'll just consume problematic material in secret while they continue to virtue signal online. Alternatively, if Sean Baker following pro-Israel accounts is your red line, then it's your red line. I'm not going to chastise you for living your life and engaging with art that way. It all comes down to the type of person you are and what you value, as long as you're doing it for your own reasons and not the validations of others on the internet. Which is to say, I think a lot of people are talking about Anora right now just for validation on the internet. Now, my spiel about Sean Baker and supporting artists and auteurs you like or don't like, depending on their politics, like, I feel like I give that in every one of my videos at this point, and it's pretty straightforward. I still kind of remain consistent in it that it's like a very subjective thing, right? But I think the thing that's like setting apart this Anora controversy is that people are using their adamant dislike of Sean Baker to like take their critique of Anora to a non-objective level, in the sense that like they're finding, like, they're trying to find like a bigger reason as to why no one should enjoy the movie or like the movie or feel any type of way about the movie because of Sean Baker. It's like, and it wasn't like that, I feel like, when this movie was coming out, and, you know, people who followed Sean Baker, yeah, they were probably more aware of his politics, but like his kind of like specific controversies didn't really hit the mainstream until later, and so now it's almost causing like this weird delayed retroactive reaction to the film. And I think that sucks, actually. Okay, so keeping in mind again that some of these takes might actually just be influenced by the general dislike of Sean Baker, and some of them are being said in earnest, let's go through a couple of these points. The first argument here is how the film portrays sex work in general, and whether or not Sean Baker is glamorizing or fetishizing it for the sake of award season prestige. In one of these exchanges, a user says, "Waiting for the day that a filmmaker has the balls to display the experience of POC LGBT sex workers, because this kind of glamorization and representation of sex work is fucking sick." To which many people replied, Sean Baker already made a film about that. It's called Tangerine, and you can watch it right now. Meanwhile, others argue that all of his films have this same fetishy lens, so it doesn't really matter. I'm using the word fetishy because I don't think the terms glorification or glamorization actually mean anything anymore. They've become these meaningless buzzwords that people throw around when they don't actually like something, but they can't articulate why. And like, here's my problem with this critique in general, right? I don't get why we have to turn individual personal gripes of the film into a nebulous political diatribe. For example, I do think that Annie's characterization in Anora does fall flat, and the ending doesn't quite work for me because I don't really buy into Igor's whole humble gesture of humanity that finally breaks down her walls or whatever. I just feel like there was a more interesting way to write the back half of the movie to get to that final endpoint, perhaps one where we take the time to get to know Annie a bit better, but that's just me, and clearly that's not how the majority of people feel, which is fine, but I'm not going to take that thought and turn it into an intangible comment about the portrayal of all sex workers, you know what I mean? And I feel like a lot of the statements on Twitter that I'm seeing about, like how this film portrays the sex worker community, and like, I've read different opinions of sex workers on different sides of the aisle, which I'll get into in a minute, but it's reading all very hollow to me, as like, listen to sex workers, and then no one is actually listening to anything that these sex workers are saying. You know what I mean? Like, they're just using that as like a way to score like empty social clout. It's like, yeah, listen to sex workers, but like, have you ever spoken to a sex worker? Have you ever like talked? I highly doubt that like a lot of these people have ever spoken to a sex worker in real life. And I think that makes a difference when you're like very like brazenly engaging in this kind of discourse online. Look, since people got wind of the fact that I was doing this video, I've been sent so many articles and POVs from sex workers about their thoughts on this film, and I've read all of them because I'm interested in their perspectives, and I found that those opinions don't always align with one another. Some folks think that Anora is a very realistic portrayal of a sex worker's life, and that it's cool to see a character like Annie stand up for herself and be a fleshed out lead role rather than just an objectified doormat. Others view the film's aesthetic as fetishy and inaccurate to the real life counterpart. For example, I've seen many critiques of how the other sex workers are portrayed in the film as bitchy and mean to Anora, when in reality many clubs have actual supportive communities, like any other workplace. Contrast this with something like Emilia Perez, where, every Mexican I spoke with about the film had a commonality in disagreeing with how their country was portrayed or how their language was spoken. Qualities of that film are objectively offensive and misinformed rather than just, a simple disagreement and analysis of the film's themes. And of course, you shouldn't ever speak about a group of people as if they're a monolith who all agree on one thing, but for people screaming "listen to sex workers," I did, and it turns out there's a lot of gray area in how they interpret the film, so using this as a checkmate is weird to me. Okay, next up, let's talk about the infamous Anora Poor Things tweet as my brain continues to leak out of my ears. Wanted to get my phone here so I can read this very directly. It says, "Poor Things and Anora winning are signs of conservatism and misogyny making a comeback, by the way." Look, I made it through all of last year's award season without having to publicly discuss the fact that I did not care for Poor Things as much as everyone else did, so the fact that all roads have led me back to this point is painful enough, but the fact that y'all are forcing me to defend Anora and Poor Things, two movies that I did not really love, is crazy. Oh my god. So this tweet is boneheaded because some people really just say anything to sound smart. Like, this is gonna be really confusing to explain, but in my opinion, posts like this are actually reinforcing conservatism and misogyny because for some reason, everyone in my generation and younger is terrified of depictions of sex and intimacy in any form, especially when it's portrayed in a dynamic that is, quote, problematic, as if depiction is always equivalent to endorsement. I've had this issue for so long now because I think sex and intimacy and power are at the core of everything we do as human beings, and there is nothing wrong with exploring that in art the way we have done for centuries, and putting that fundamental truth in the context of of awards and Hollywood accolades and modern day conservatism. It's incorrect. It's an incompatible analysis. Our entertainment algorithms are now so hyper-specific and catered to us that no one has to engage with art that makes them uncomfortable anymore, and not only that, but people's internal shame about their feelings towards sex have become a means of displaying social clout to isolated communities online who pride themselves on a lack of lived experience. You know, it's all about who can be the most ideologically pure, which on-screen ship is the most healthy and cinnamon bun-coated, and real life isn't like that. Sex is messy, relationships are messy, you will be challenged by that realization at some point in real life, and going out of your way to avoid engaging with those types of depictions in art is not only an act of disservice to your own well-being, but it's also a tenet of modern-day conservatism where you must fear the things you don't understand, and eventually problematic rep and liberal degeneracy loop around into becoming the same thing, and all of a sudden we're banning books and boycotting TV shows and giving legitimate credence to the fascist fucks advocating for all of that. That being said, as someone who did not care for Anora or Poor Things all that much, the idea that I would like to put forward here is that both of these films were written by men, arguably without separation from the male gaze, I guess because they were written by men, and I think that's why I personally did not connect with them all that much. I love media that explores the sexuality and politic of women. It's kind of my thing. And I guess I just want to see more women filmmakers given the budget and the platform and the accolades to explore those things as well. It's not that I have an inherent problem with men doing it, I just want more women to be doing it because I think some of them can probably do it better. That's just me though, and if you disagree, and you like Poor Things in Anora, and you feel seen and represented, that's totally fine. I think we tend to get so, nebulous and blown out of proportion with our own discourse these days that, everything has to be this super grand, mega statement that kind of ignores all of the other general context up until this point, that often the solutions to, the problems that these people are complaining about are pretty simple. Support women filmmakers. Go watch films that are made by women. That's the harder thing to do, and it's the thing that's going to get you less clout for doing it, but studios will only push for the things that are going to make them the most money. So regardless of how you feel about Sean Baker, he's benefiting from all of this talk about him right now, because he's now a studio provocateur with 4 Oscars under his belt, who is going to be given a blank check to do whatever he wants next. So you're better off advocating for what you do like instead of complaining about what you don't. I guess the last thing I want to talk about here is the idea that this is all women in Hollywood will ever get rewarded for. There's a quote floating around from Cheryl Lee Ralph right now about how the fastest way to get to an Oscar is to get on the pole, and that sex sells, and it always has. And I don't necessarily disagree with that sentiment. There's another stat being kicked around online about how a lot of the women who have won Best Actress or Best Supporting Actress have played sex workers, and I'm not discounting that at all. There are narratives that play into how the Academy votes for its best actors. For example, biopics used to be the surefire path to an Oscar win because of the actively transformative nature of that type of role, and you inherently have something to compare the performance to, the person's lived experience. And playing a sex worker is an inherently transformative experience as well, and it often requires an actress to be very literally vulnerable, often physically naked. And you could argue that that's getting rewarded for the wrong reasons, but it's getting rewarded nonetheless. I think there's another perspective here, and this goes back to the inherent fear that everyone has about women embracing their sexuality, where that type of vulnerability is a skill. It could be seen as empowering. I don't ever see anybody ask female actresses how they feel about that. There's also a double standard here. For example, Adrien Brody gets very naked during The Brutalist. He's fucking a lot during that movie. And I feel like that gets treated and perceived as an essential part of embodying the character and getting really vulnerable about the character's experience. Whereas when a woman does it, it's just this is her direct path to an Oscar. It's just a girl taking her top off to win Academy votes from men. And I think that is more misogynistic and inherently devalues the skill and craft of these women in the pursuit of making a greater point about how sex sells. Anyway, those are my opinions about the current Anora discourse and a very explosive closeout to a very long Oscar season. If you disagree with anything I've said today, that's totally fine. Be sure to leave me a very long comment about it. And while you're down there, you can hit like and subscribe, maybe argue with some other people. Totally doesn't benefit me in the long run for you to be doing that. Nope, not at all. Thanks so much for watching, everyone. A couple of quick reminders. I have this video if you missed it, you should go watch it. It's really good, and I think you'll like it. Also, you can follow me at all of the social media listed in this link tree, which can be found in the description down below. I also have videos on my second channel that you can check out. I also posted a video to my Patreon today where I talk about all of the other Oscar drama that is not Anora related, so if you want to hear any of my thoughts on that, subscribe over there. It's a great community and a good time. Thank you so much, and I'll see you soon.
Art is dead. Entertainers like to seem complicated, but we're not complicated. I can explain it pretty easily. Have you ever been to a birthday party for children? One of the children won't stop screaming, cause he's just a little attention attractor when he grows up to be a comic or actor.